Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Cool. So, thanks for coming. Eva is going to be doing mic duties tonight. So, I'll just give you a quick rundown. Startup Grind is now in over 200 cities around the world. This is the Auckland chapter. There's quite a few people that have been in before, but just for anyone new, we run these events monthly. And if you keep coming, we'll keep putting them on. Thanks to The Grid for hosting us, 90 Seconds for filming, and Aaron, obviously, for coming down and taking the time out to speak to us. One of the things we do before anyone starts talking here is to thank Aaron for coming down. We give him a big round of applause. Rather than kind of intro you, him on his background and stuff, we'll kind of let that come out during the talk. I'll hand you over to Eva now, who will run through some housekeeping.
Thank you. Alright, hey guys. I'm Eva, so I'm co-director for Startup Grind Auckland. I help Greg out most months. I'm also activation manager for Biz Dojo, and we operate Grid Auckland, which is the place you are at now. Some housekeeping to keep us all safe and healthy. We've got bathrooms just through these doors or across the other side of the cafe. We also have, if we need to exit really quickly, we can head through the cafe. There's a lobby entrance out to the laneway, and we meet by the pedestrian crossing, which is Halsey Street. Wi-Fi is Grid AKL Guest is the network, and the password is Hagrid101 with a capital H. You can't quite see it in this light, but there's some Twitter handles up on the wall as well, so if you are on Twitter, please join in. So we've got Grid AKL, Startup Grind AKL, and Aaron Patzer is A Patzer. That's right, isn't it? Yep, awesome. So please get involved in that as well. Yeah, if you need anything, come and chat afterwards, or throughout the thing as well, if it's not too disruptive, that would be really cool. The format of what we're going to do tonight, if you haven't been before, Startup Grind is a fireside chat style, so we're going to kick off with an interview, and then we're going to open it up to the crowd to some Q&A to finish off, which will be a really big section tonight. And then we'll finish off with a bit more networking, and I think all the beers may be gone, but there might be some other drinks back there. So yeah, let's get straight into it. So probably a man that needs very little introduction, but here we go. So Aaron Patzer was the founder and CEO of Mint.com, an online personal finance software, and it sold to Intuit for $170 million in 2009, so no easy feat, I'm sure. Also founded Fountain.com, a video conferencing and chat application connects you with others to help solve any problem. This also sold to Porch.com in 2015. Since then, Aaron has been keeping busy and building and selling lots of other startups, invested in a number of successful tech startups, and is now in beautiful New Zealand, which we're very, very thankful for. So let's just kick straight into the questions, and it'd be really awesome to hear a little bit about your career history, your background, what you've been learning so far.
Okay, thanks for having me. This is the biggest talk I've done in quite a while. But when I came to New Zealand, I started out by sort of walking with my partner over the length of the country and seeing next to no one for the first 6 months that I was here. So I'm glad to be here at Grid Auckland and get back to business. Okay, I've got like a big slide on my career history. It started out, well, yeah, there we go. In 1997, my first startup success. I wouldn't call it a startup, I'd call it more of a small business, but we can get to the distinction of that later because it's important. Was making websites for people. It was actually called getawebsite.com. Helped put me through what I would call college, but you call it uni here. And then I had a series of unsuccessful attempts at companies, and that's one of the lessons that I would want to give you from my own career history. I've got 6 companies up there, and there's more that I just were too small to list. There's really only 2 or 3 that haven't been a total failure. So for anybody who's in the startup game, if you haven't made it yet, it's just normal. So, when I was at Princeton, I tried to do something called genomic acceleration. That was a chip that does bioinformatics algorithms very, very fast. I'm trained as an electrical and computer engineer. You're touching me, say.
It's fine, it's fine. Everything's completely normal.
But the truth is I didn't really know enough about bioinformatics to pull that one off. And the other thing that I did is I tried to do it while I was a student. And I tend to think that you have to go all in on a startup and give it 100% of your time, which means quit your day job. After that failure, I actually worked for IBM for about 6 months, hated the big company lifestyle. How many people here are at a big company right now? Not too many, that's good. But I got to work on the PlayStation 3 chip, which was really cool. So again, that was hardware. And then I worked for a startup, and that was the most important maybe career decision that I made to get into the startup world, is to see how a startup is done and to realize that it's done just by kind of normal people. And in fact, I probably learned more about what not to do, about putting out a product and knowing your customer and fundraising, and you just get exposed to all of that, and it becomes less of a mystery. And I think that there's a tendency to put entrepreneurs, and particularly successful entrepreneurs, on a pedestal. And we're just sort of normal people. It's still a little bit weird to like be on this side of the audience, like I necessarily have anything valuable to say to all of you who actually paid to come to this event. So at that startup, I think I was maybe 23 or 24 at the time, I had a chance to start the Silicon Valley division of that company and get a little leadership expertise. Once I was there, I didn't last for more than a few months at that startup. I started my own, which was Mint, mint.com, which today is the largest personal finance tool in the US and Canada. It's got about 15 million users. There was a period, gosh, it would have been 5 or 6 years ago, when I went up and down Queen Street depositing $40 in each and every one of the Kiwi banks here to start Mint in New Zealand. Bought mint.com.au to do it in Australia. Looked at doing it in Singapore and the UK as well. When we were acquired, Intuit didn't particularly have the appetite for doing much international work. But the short idea behind Mint was it would pull together all of your finances from multiple different locations. So most Americans have many credit cards, checking and savings accounts, investments, all of that, pulled it together in one place and gave it a really good interface, which banks are not known for, categorized all of your spending, budgets, alerts, made sure you didn't overspend, that sort of thing. So I grew that to 38 people, and I think when we were acquired, it was doing about 12 million in revenue, and I ran it for another year and a half, and it was doing maybe 24 million in revenue. Managed like 100 people at a big company again. Realized the second time around that no, I don't want to work for a big company. And so I got this cushy position called the VP of Product Innovation, which meant I had no direct reports, and moved across the country and worked 2 or 3 days out of the month for Intuit, but they thought I was working full time, really productive. And that gave me the opportunity to do pretty much full time Swift. Show you a little screenshot of, this is Mint, or this was Mint the day that we were acquired. We were known for having good design. It's not the flat design that you see today that's in vogue, but it was considered good design at the time. This is Swift. I'm not the best computer renderer, but This was for a magnetic levitation system that would do personal rapid transit. And the maglev works. It's just way too damn expensive. This was 2011. Any of you who follow Hyperloop, they will soon find out that it's way too expensive. After that, this is a bit of a grainy picture of my thumb and fingers. This is a LiDAR camera, so it would do depth sensing. And I was trying to work on self-driving car technology. But by this point in my career, I realized that I'm not really a hardware person anymore. I'd lost my ability to do that. And so from that point until now, I've done pretty much exclusively software and software startups, and invested in software startups, and particularly consumer software. And so Fountain, which you mentioned, would connect you to a doctor or a lawyer or a veterinarian or an electrician over video chat in about 60 seconds. And it used natural language processing, so you just say or type a question, any question, it would figure out what expertise was needed to solve it. Yeah, we had 500 or 1,000 experts on the system, so really quick, within a minute, you'd be video chatting with someone. We didn't get nearly the traction that we had with Mint and its millions of users, but the technology was valuable enough that we were acquired. I put this down as sort of an even mark. The investors are paid back, the employees, got some stock, but I didn't make anything out of it. The startup game is, even if you've had success, is really challenging. And that takes us to today.
Awesome. So you're in New Zealand. What brought you out here, and what have you got next on your plate?
Well, so I've wanted to live in New Zealand since 2004, when I first came here with my family. I always thought it was a beautiful place. Before we quote unquote made it, some of my startup friends and I each said if we make it, we would buy a house in an interesting location and invite everyone else to that location. And I picked New Zealand back in 2005, 2006. So yeah, I'm inviting all of my friends over, but no one seems to want to make the flight. A little isolated here. And then my partner's a Kiwi.
Good. Congratulations. Yeah. Cool. So looking back at some of those lessons, and how has it shaped what you work with now? What the kind of current projects you pick, and what sort of criteria come into your mind when you're looking at potential investments?
Yeah. So for my own companies, because I'm still active at the startup game. A lot of you might recognize me from the guy who just sits at a desk and codes all day upstairs. Yeah. I still program. I still love that quite a lot. And for companies that I do angel investing in, I've done maybe a dozen angel investments over the years, and I've done mentoring with the Founder Institute for many years to dozens or hundreds of companies all over the world. I look for four things. So the first one is, are you solving a real problem? And by a real problem, I mean one that's inherent to the human condition, one that will exist 10 years from now. And there's a lot of stuff that people do, particularly online, that I think is very short-lived or is really more of a feature that should just be incorporated into something else. Yeah, absolutely. Minor variations on a theme rather than something real. So does it solve a real problem? Is it in a big market? And this is the one that I think Kiwis have the single biggest problem with. There's a tendency, from what I've seen in the startups that I've talked to, and I've seen maybe half a dozen pitches or companies. that I've talked to for sort of potential angel investment. Haven't pulled the trigger yet. And this is market size. And in the US, we sort of look for the billion-dollar markets and not the ones that are 20 million or even 100 or 200 million. And so you have particular companies that, well, here's an example of just market sizing. Here's a company that I really like, love the product. It does solve a real problem. They can make money from it, which is the third criteria. And the fourth criteria is, can you use technology as a competitive advantage? So Weirdly, really like the product, really like the founder. Are there any Weirdly people here? Am I about to just... I'll do this to the companies that I've talked to. The market size is probably too small. It's a startup that helps with recruiting to make sure there's a right culture fit with the people who are applying for jobs at a particular organization. It solves a real problem. You definitely want culture fit, particularly at a startup or even a big entity. It's hard to sift through all the candidates. But the way they've positioned it is more for enterprise companies, and so they've got maybe 2,000 customers, not 10,000 or 100,000 or several million. And they can really only charge maybe $1 or so per applicant. And so you multiply that and by the number of companies, the number of applications they get, and it could be $100 or $200 million market. And that's pretty good, but it'll take them forever to get there. So you have to think, what can we do that's bigger than just that particular product? Another one,
Yes.
Glory League. Love Glory League from a technology standpoint. It does computer vision on sporting events to develop highlight reels. To me, the opportunity, and that's really cool, and they're selling it to a bunch of basketball venues around New Zealand, but it's only in New Zealand. And they can make $6,000 a year at these basketball venues, but they have to install hardware, and it's fixed point, and that helps them do the positioning of the camera on the court. And the real opportunity for them is, well, could you take any user-uploaded video of any sport? Soccer, rugby, football, baseball, develop a 3D model and let me be the referee. With computer vision, if you had enough angles or if you did enough computation, you could actually put yourself and alter the video in a way that you could be anywhere on the field. That's cool. And that would open up to all sports, and that would be, you know, a much bigger deal than basketball in New Zealand. But the problem is they're being pushed in that direction by their investors. So one of the issues that I've seen with New Zealand startups is access to capital is limited, and the people who invest here, they tend to have made their money not in startups. They've made their money in real estate, as Kiwis do, or in services, or they're a doctor, or they're a lawyer, and investing in startups it's kind of like a hobby, and it's just a different part of their portfolio. It's the 5% fund money that they've allocated, not to real estate or to shares or to bonds or whatever, but they treat it just like any other investment, and it's not. What they want is they want to treat software and technology as a business. So Glory League can put $2,000 worth of equipment into each of their venues, and they can get $6,000 a year. They make $4,000 profit, do that around New Zealand, keep doing it around New Zealand, maybe expand to Australia, and grow your market and grow it profitably, and that's what we want you to do. And that's completely rational. And that's the way that every business is supposed to be run, and that's not the way that tech startups are supposed to be run.
It sort of leads into what you said before. Perhaps you can expand on the difference between startup and small business, and perhaps tying in that growth.
Yeah. So a small business is like your cafe, or like what I was just describing, investors wanting the Glory League example, sorry to use them, to do. And that is incrementally make a profit, invest those profits back into expansion. A tech startup is one that uses technology to instantly go national, if not global, from day one. There are really little or no geographic restrictions. Mint, because of the banking system, was geographically restricted, but it was available all over the US day one to millions of people and then to Canada. And so your primary goal in a tech startup is your actual competition is everyone in the world, because it's a winner-take-all market. Because it has no geographic boundaries, you could be competing with people in Brazil or people in Silicon Valley or people in Europe, and there's really only room for, I mean, the top company typically gets 80% of the market share, and maybe there's room for 2 or 3, and that's it. So your primary goal, I think, is really to grab as much market as possible and to really focus on your distribution. You should have a way to make money, but it's more important to find your product market fit and expand your market faster, sooner.
And how do you think New Zealanders can overcome this challenge? How can they think bigger, and how can they experience that requirement that you need?
Okay, so just to put things in perspective, I always think of New Zealand in a couple of different ways. So I'm working on a new piece of software that I'll talk about in a bit, but it's for emergency rooms, and eventually that's the way to get in the door. It's for healthcare software in general. I'm doing a trial in Atlanta, Georgia, with a particular emergency room that runs with a place called Emory University. Runs 7 emergency rooms in Atlanta. Atlanta's got a population of 5 million people. That's more than New Zealand. So with one single relationship, I've got more than New Zealand's worth of possibility, revenue, and user base. And so you need to go international immediately if you're in software. And that might mean sales force over in the US, where 50% of all enterprise software sales take place, and close to that in consumer software, if my numbers are correct. And it probably means trying to seek some outside investment from Singapore, Australia, the US, or the UK, at least an angel investor or 2 who can eventually introduce you to your Series A or your Series B investor. So most of the sort of successful Kiwi companies have raised overseas. Venn certainly has, from San Francisco, and so has Zero. TradeGecko went to Singapore. So you don't necessarily need to move your development away from New Zealand. The one thing that I've found is of all the nations that I've been to, Kiwis, Australians, the US and Canada tend to work the hardest as compared to Europe or the UK. And people here are every bit as good at technology. The designers are as good, the programmers are as good. That's not the problem. The education's not the problem, the skills aren't the problem. It's capital and connections and a willingness to expand out of the islands.
So, carrying on from that positive spin, let's go there more. What have you seen any Kiwi startups that are exciting you, or on the right track, or doing things that are bold and awesome?
Oh, I like Spock. So Spock is commentating on live sports video, and one of the things that they've said that they want to do is they're trying to get content from all over, from Southeast Asia and from the US. And the other thing that they're not afraid to do is bend the rules a bit. So they haven't done this yet, but I'm looking forward to it. But pulling all of the live content or sports archives from all the American college sports, the baseball, basketball, American football, which they wouldn't have the rights to, But if they do it well and make it valuable for those universities, then they can pull it off. And you see this with a lot of successful companies in Silicon Valley. Airbnb pulled, against the terms of service, listings from Craigslist, and emailed all of those people, hey, you should list with Airbnb when we were getting started. With Fountain, I may have looked at several million or 100 million LinkedIn profiles to figure out how all human skills are interrelated, because you can see the correlation of how often does somebody have JavaScript on a resume online. They weren't the only source, obviously. Versus React. So I know the Fountain knew the percentage of people who could answer a React question or a Java question, and how skills were interrelated, which was really important for us. YouTube they were pretty much more explicit about their piracy. I think they pushed it too far, but it worked out for them. So definitely don't do anything illegal or immoral, but sometimes you have to kickstart and bend the rules just a bit. Yeah.
It was very diplomatically put, well done. So what current projects have you got on? You mentioned a new startup. What projects have ticked those criteria boxes for you?
Well, this one happened in a very natural sort of way. Because I was working with my sister, who's a professor of epidemiology, and my brother-in-law, who is an emergency room doctor. And they knew that I could do natural language processing and machine learning. And so what it is it's a mobile check-in for an emergency room. So in the US, the average wait time for an emergency room is 45 minutes. It's 4 or 5 hours in a lot of big city hospitals. Forever before you get to see a doctor. And so you can, it'll ask you the same questions that a doctor would, and it does it dynamically. So why are you here? How long has this happened? Has this ever happened before? Depending upon how you reply, it'll ask intelligent follow-up questions, because it uses natural language processing. And then it uses machine learning to predict the severity of that particular emergency to help prioritize and figure out whether you'll need a CT scan or an X-ray, what medications you might be administered, a whole slew of other things. These are just recommendations. They still need a doctor approval because it's not 100% accurate. But the goal is to cut the wait time in the emergency room in half. If you could do that, you could probably sell this software for $50,000 or $100,000 a year to 5,000 emergency rooms in the US. So that's $250 to $500 million. Doesn't hit the $1 billion criteria in my mind. And so the larger play would be to do something in either electronic medical records, and in particular, how you can use health data with machine learning and artificial intelligence to assist doctors. And that's a huge space that would affect tens of millions of people. And you can make real money on it. Sales cycle's long. That's the biggest downside.
And what stage are you at? What are you working on at the moment for it?
It's pretty early. I've only been working at it maybe 4 or 5 months. But we've got sort of a team of 3 or 4 people. I'm the only full-time at this point, and hopefully we'll do a trial with patients in a couple of months. Doctors and nurses sort of are already playing around with the system.
And is there anything we can help you with that? Is there anyone you're looking for that startup?
Yeah. So 2 things that you guys could help me with. Anybody who knows emergency room doctors or nurses here in New Zealand, all of my user testing is right now in the US, which is problematic. And so I'd love more local contacts if anyone has them. I think I flashed my email up earlier. But it's apatzer at alumni.princeton.edu. Yeah, so that's what I could use help with on... Oh, and one more developer that I could use. A good Java or Scala backend developer. because I've been doing all of that work myself. Multi-tiered architecture, scalability, document storage, and rendering, NoSQL, that sort of thing.
Awesome.
With luck, this will be a real company early next year.
Exciting. Cool. Let's turn out to you guys now to have a bit of a change. So, does anyone have any questions that they'd like to kick it off? I might actually ask you to put your hand up, and we'll try and run some mics out so we can capture the questions. Anyone want to kick anything off? Greg?
Yeah, so you mentioned obviously looking into problems and technology that are going to be around in like sort of 5-10 years time. Is there any, obviously planning that far ahead technology-wise is difficult, is there anything you specifically look for? Any technologies that you predict are going to be definitely kind of changing the game in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, actually, I've got pointers on this sort of topic in general. I look for a problem that's still going to exist in 5 to 10 years. So the problem that Mint solved was personal finances are too complex. People don't necessarily want to manage their money, and so you want to make that easier. That's a problem that will probably be around for all of time. So that's what I mean when I say focus on a real problem that people have, that a lot of people have, and particularly that you have in your own life, more so than figuring out what technology will do in 5 to 10 years. Is one of my, let's see, oh, slow animation. And I can't click past it. Just take a little breather here.
Yeah. Everyone take a moment to think of your questions.
Again. Technology is usually not the risk. We live in a great era if you're going to build a tech company. There are so many frameworks for web and mobile development, for hardware. I mean, like, the new Raspberry Pi stuff is awesome. How cheap you can get hardware to do cellular or Bluetooth or Internet of Things technology, it's really hit an inflection point. Technology is typically not the problem. The problem is product market fit. And so whether you've built something that people actually give a damn about, and that's one of those things that I think is a mistake that I've made in my past, that I was working on maglev and self-driving cars because it was cool tech, and I just wanted to see if it could be done. The maglev works. I should have asked the question, should I be doing this? Is it going to be too expensive? Is there a market for this? What are the implications of actually, building it on the landscape and whatnot? With Fountain, there was okay product market fit, but not enough. I could have done more, both user testing and market testing. The problem there was there are big companies that are being built in specific verticals, doctor on demand or vet on demand. We were sort of all of those things, which was hard from a brand perspective. So that was more of a market fit in what space you occupy in a person's mind when they think about doing a certain thing. Spock has the opportunity, maybe because YouTube is full of so many other things besides sports, there's not really a good way to watch live sports from all over the world in one location online. It's a pain in the ass, and you always go to these really sketchy sites that pop up a billion things and give you viruses. They could be that. Even though YouTube seems like the dominant player and way ahead and has the distribution, the mindset is there's too many other things. So yeah, technology is actually the smallest part of your concern. Can't remember what other tips I put up here. Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, we can talk about that one.
Yeah, sounds good.
Oh, the other problem with Fountain was we were trying to forge sort of an entirely new market, which was basically that if you were going to, I started Fountain because, well, I've got a place up in Tufranui, which is like an hour north of here, and it's really hard to get people out there to do any work. And it would take, it was always like a Saturday or Sunday, and so I was like, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm willing to give it a try. Wouldn't it be awesome if I could just talk to an electrician or a plumber in like 60 seconds and solve this? Because I'm a pretty hands-on guy, except something like that didn't exist at all. And so it's a really kind of a weird concept. You mean, you're not going to fix the problem. I still have to fix the problem, but you're going to tell me how to do it. And you're going to be able to show me, with live video how to do it, rather than me reading a tutorial on like howto.com. It's a cool concept. Maybe it'll take off in 10 or 20 years, but it just doesn't exist. Mint there was Quicken and Microsoft Money and all these other tools that existed before, and it was a way better version of that. It was better, faster, cheaper, and in Mint's case it was free versus $80 a year. And so it's better to improve on an existing market than try to pioneer a new one. And that's true of even the innovative things that you think of. The iPhone, 2007? Come on. If you ever watch like GoldenEye or The Saint, both 1995, they both feature Nokia phones connecting with the internet, doing badass hacker shit. That was 12 years before the iPhone. iPod, not very innovative. Bunches of those. Tesla, great electric cars. They've been around since 1905.
I was going to say, just on that then, so you mentioned like obviously YouTube, all of the, maybe the kind of tech that once were startups that are now that sort of size. Would you be looking to actually go niche and disrupt those with the problems that they're facing and simplify that? You mentioned obviously Squawk have the sport version.
Yeah, I think I personally became too obsessed for 3 or 4 years with trying to do something just like radically new and innovative. And I think that the conclusion that I've come to just in the past few months is that you can actually succeed in anything in software simply by rebuilding it from the ground up every 10 years. This doesn't work in network effect businesses like TradeMe, simply because it's not the quality of the software or any features that it has that are why it's valuable. It's the number of people using them. It's hard. Facebook is now more than 10 years old. Hard to disrupt those, although you could argue that all the chat and Instagram and all of those, largely now owned by Facebook, did that. So yeah, I think that every 10 years you should just rebuild everything in software, and that would make a very successful business. So anything that's more than 10 years old, you could disrupt it.
Difficult question. If we rewind back to 2006, instead of Princeton, you went to, let's assume, Auckland Uni, and you started from New Zealand. Would you have made it, by doing a Mint.com, similar things in New Zealand? Or how would you do it differently if you started here?
That's a good question. I think that I would probably have to, in order to make it successful, do what I suggested earlier, which is you can use New Zealand as a test market for, a couple months to work out the kinks, but don't go much longer than that or you'll be wed to this market, and then immediately expand to Australia, Canada, the US. So I don't know if I could have done it outside the US. I was fortunate enough to, now it took 50 no's before I got my first yes. People said no one will ever type in their bank username and password to just a random website. You don't trust your brother with that information. But one person finally said yes, and I got angel investment. And so I wasn't a proven entrepreneur. I didn't have a product. I had a prototype, but I raised $750,000 US back in 2006. and there was just better access to capital. Even before we launched, we raised another 4 million. Oh, one thing that I would suggest for the ecosystem is make a personal commitment right now, if you do have an exit over $10 million, to don't just retire, don't just do the 3 Bs. Is that the thing in here in New Zealand? I've heard varying descriptions of what the 3 Bs are, but I know one of them's a batch. Commit yourself to being an advisor, being an angel investor. That's what makes the Silicon Valley in particular so remarkable and successful, is that most of the people I raised, I want to say every single person that I raised money from initially was at one time in their career a founder themselves or an early employee at a startup. Out of Mint, because, and you should give your employees stock options, like lots of them. So the first 10 people at Mint, each made over $1 million, I think, and they became angel investors and started their own companies. And so that's how you get an ecosystem going. They don't do that in France. They don't get the batch, they get the chateau, country estate, that sort of thing, and they immediately retire no matter what age they're at. If you do that, the ecosystem will continue to suffer. It's weird to me that there aren't more people with zero or Trade Me or whatever money as angel investors. But part of that is because the owners get basically everything, and there just aren't the stock options that you have in the US. So whenever you set up a company, set up good stock options. It's both better for employee retention and ownership and working hard, and better for the ecosystem.
I've got a question. So as a previous tech founder, definitely experienced the same thing with the sort of maturity of the investment community up here. Is that something that you're sort of setting out to do something about? Is it part of a pet project for you in terms of education, or how do you see New Zealand we start sort of turning that around?
Now that I'm here and back in business and not walking the length of the country, I'm happy to speak at just about any event. I'm giving a talk on natural language processing at the NLP meetup in a couple of weeks. I think I'll probably do the Founder Institute Auckland, since Founder Institute was started by one of my best friends. And if you've got an interesting startup, like I'm always happy to hear about it. And if you are tackling a big market, might even invest. So that's what I can do. What I don't think that I would be good at is being a venture capitalist, not at this point in my career, because I'm too interested in doing my own thing and still being in the game as a founder.
Do you see an opportunity to change the attitude here, though? Because I think that's the problem, is the way that people are investing.
I mean, I don't know how to change anyone's attitude in a very direct way. You can't really bludgeon people about that sort of thing. I mean, they're acting, you can try to educate them. I can say the things that I said earlier about this is not just your 5% fund money, is not your regular portfolio investment. It is, you should expect as an investor to lose 50% of your money in the first 12 to 18 months, not because the startups were bad or that you need to be upset with the founders, simply because that's what happens. And sometimes you'll get lucky and you'll make 10 times your money, and it'll make up for all of it, which has tended to happen in my angel investing career.
Brandon from Cryptics. So there's a school of thought that the success of a startup is based on the people that you partner with rather than the actual idea itself. So my thoughts, or my question to you is, who were you surrounded by and who were the people that you built Mint with to make it as successful as it was? I mean, I'm assuming you obviously were the main driver, but there's always a team that goes into building and making the company successful. So how important is the team into driving a successful startup as opposed to just the idea?
The idea is very important as well, but the team is crucial. So, being an engineer, I did a lot of the prototyping myself. The first 3 hires that I had were engineers. I hired a VP of engineering instead of trying to do that myself because I knew there was somebody who was better. In fact, there's somebody better than me at basically every function in the business because I tend to be a generalist. So I was lucky enough to hire a guy named David Michaels as my VP of engineering, and he worked at PGP, Pretty Good Privacy. So he was really good at all the security and scalability, cryptography. I hired a guy named Anton, who was an experienced, actually my partner's uncle. That's how we met. And he was a startup lawyer, so he'd seen for 10 or 15 years prior hundreds of startups and what should be in a pitch deck, and arguably couldn't have done it without him. My head of product was out of eBay and PayPal, very experienced guy. My head of marketing, Donna, she was the chief marketing officer of Expedia. Massive. She was also the chief marketing officer of Intuit previously for a short period. So these were people who were, in some cases, twice my age and way more experienced than I had. And somehow I convinced them, to join the team. Lots of stock options helped. I mean, they owned a good portion of the company as well.
With international expansion or growing, scaling overseas, is there any adaptation you have to make to the actual technology for different markets? Like you went to New Zealand with Mint, did you have to adapt the product or anything much to have product market fit here?
Yeah, I mean, so each market is a bit unique. So for personal finance, the different types of accounts are a little bit different. Term deposits act a little bit different than what we call CDs or certificates of deposit in the US. But by and large, it would have been the same product. So they're what I would consider minor or superficial tweaks to go international. A different language might be a little different. The thing that was more challenging for Mint in New Zealand is Kiwis seem to have most of their banking with a single bank, whereas Americans have relationships with about 10 different financial institutions. And that made Mint even more valuable in the US, but I still think it would have been very valuable here. Start from the beginning if you're going to do I-18N, for all of you engineers out there.
Hi Aaron, thank you very much for that excellent presentations. I've got a couple of questions regarding the fundraising process. You mentioned you initially raised about $750,000 from angel investors, and initially you raised $4 million. So when you raised $750,000, I guess it's at a very early stage. You exchanging your ideas or your very early formation of the company, haven't got a complete product, you raised $750,000. How much did you actually give up the companies to the angel investors?
Yeah, so we raised $750,000 on, I think it was a $3 million valuation, so we sold off 25% of the company initially. So maybe not as much as you might suspect. In the US, you never in a single round sell more than a third of the company. Anybody who ever wants 40 or 50%, you can tell them to go to hell. They're trying to manipulate you. Investors shouldn't have special liquidation preferences typically. You don't see those hardly ever. In Silicon Valley, it's always, they get their money back first, but otherwise it's a one-to-one conversion on a successful exit.
Sorry, what situation a company was in? Was it profitable? Was it making any incomes, or
No.
it's not?
No, this was, I just had a prototype. I mean, the thing about Silicon Valley is they bet on the team and whether the idea, is needed. So basically the 4 criteria that I gave you: does it solve a real problem in a big market? Can it make money in a way that uses technology defensively or for distribution in a big way? And that's it. They don't look at, net present value of revenues or anything like that. I've seen people here in New Zealand raising really small amounts of money and investors demanding like 40 or 50 pages of documents and projections. All revenue projections when you're early on are total bullshit. First off, they all look like hockey sticks, and they're pointless. You should only prove that you can generally make, say, X dollars per customer. Like you've actually done some customer research, or you've talked to maybe just 10 or 20 people about how much they'd be willing to pay for your software, or if it's advertising based, that you think you use standard benchmarks. Well, Facebook makes $8 per active user per year, and we think that ours can be as targeted. So, I mean, that's literally just the justification that you would have to have in the US. So I would dispense with the silliness of the 40 pages. For anybody who wants to, you should look at Sequoia Venture Capital. They have what to put in a venture presentation, and they show you slide by slide what should go in there. I think it's 14 slides or so. Your presentation should never be more than, it should be like 12 to 16 slides. And it should basically answer the question, what is it that you do immediately on page 1? Why does it matter, which is what problem does it solve? Why hasn't this been done before, which every investor will ask. That has to do with the competition and what opportunity what has changed technology-wise, or there's a new sensor out, or there's a new something that allows this to be possible in a way that it wasn't before. And then, the market size and the team. Like, you can get away with relatively few slides.
You mentioned your customer interviews, customer development, user interviews and some user testing and stuff. Do you have a process you kind of stick to? We didn't actually plan this out. I'm just picking questions at random.
Yeah, you're really nailing these. Yeah. So with Mint, this was actually the days before mobile phones were big, or smartphones were big. So we used to go up to people waiting at the train station and ask them if we could either buy them coffee or give them a Starbucks gift card, if we could ask them questions or bring them back to the office and do user testing. We give them like, I don't know, $25 or $50 gift card. And we get just normal people coming in and using the software, which is incredibly painful as a developer, because you're like, but it's so brilliant, and they don't understand this, and it's that you're laughing because it's way too true. If you've invented something and you know exactly how it works, you're blind to how someone will see it. And so the only way that you can really do it is user testing, and you don't get your friends or people who are too wed to you to do it. Pull people off the street, or ask a friend of a friend, or better yet, use usertesting.com. It'll cost you $50 to do it, but you'll get a video recording in 15 minutes, and you can take people through and ask them to, I don't know, create a video or comment on something or perform 5 or 6 actions, whatever they can get done in 15 minutes time. And you will learn a lot, and it will be incredibly painful. And not doing it has always been some of the biggest mistakes of my life and my career as a developer. So with the emergency room software, I've already done a number of usertesting.com sessions to identify what works and what doesn't. It's hard to watch. Those 15 minutes are some of the hardest. I like take 4 breaks while watching it because it's just so painful. But you have to do it.
When you were looking at getting other people involved, be it money or other people, just to help you out with it, how much of your idea did you give away and how much did you share?
All of it. Always share all of your idea. It is a common mistake among what I would call rookie entrepreneurs that someone's going to quote unquote steal my idea. Because I have so much time on my hands that I'm like, shit, that's a great idea. I'm going to drop everything that I'm doing, quit my job, and pursue that. And even if they did that, they wouldn't have the insights of you who has thought through it for longer and in different angles. So ideas are minor. It's the execution and the understanding of the customer and the understanding of the problem and how you know you're going to do it that I think matters most. At least when it comes to software and probably hardware as well. Maybe in medical you could be a little more, but I really think that the problem is people are paranoid that someone's going to steal their idea, and as a result, they don't get the feedback that they should. You should actually tell everybody what your idea is. My original idea for Mint was goal planning software. I was like, okay, all goals in life can be broken down in terms of time or money. If I want to get a university degree, an MBA or something, it's going to cost me $75,000. It's going to take 2 years of my time. And so I had this concept of goals and sub-goals and sort of like a task management kind of thing where everything was done in sort of time and money. And people are like, that's kind of stupid, but I like the fact that you're sort of budgeting and figuring out what the return on investment, the personal finance component resonates. And I was like, I like that part too. And that became what the business was. And if I had been super secretive, that might have never happened. What's your idea?
Is that common thing as well, like if someone can actually take your idea and execute it better and quicker than you can, it might not be the right idea in the first place? Next one? Yep. Sorry. Yep.
Thanks for sharing. Got a question that you talk about going globally at the day one of the startup. So you talk about going to global at the day one of the startup. I think this is crucial for starting from a smaller country like New Zealand. I guess getting funding from like overseas will probably help you to go globally pretty much. Do you have any techniques of like, for example, New Zealand start getting funding from like overseas, like in US and some other countries? Is there any like techniques in the way or how do you approach investors? Do you actually go to overseas by yourself first, or you get funding from overseas and then they set up push you out? And maybe the second question is that what's your opinion of getting actually funding from those like new developing markets, so for example Southeast Asia or like China, which is pretty big on entrepreneurship at the moment?
Okay, that was a long question. Can I remember the first part of the question? It was about overseas investment and how you would get it. Well, first you're going to have to travel overseas. That one's pretty obvious. And then if you can, do a pitch competition that angel investors will go to. That's one of the best ways. What I did when I was first seeking funding for a Mint was I would just go to every networking event that I could. Like even something like this, there's probably some angel investors in, and I would just tell my idea to everyone and try to pitch, all the time. And that helps in 2 ways. One, you might actually get investment, and 2, it helps you refine your communication. And when you refine your communication, you refine the actual idea and the clarity of it in your own mind to externalize it, and that will help you in your business as well. So the other way to do it is if you know somebody, i.e. me, who has a bunch of contacts over in Silicon Valley, and you can convince me that your startup is worthwhile, I've already done this for, say, Weirdly and Populate. I've introduced them to my venture contacts over in the US. So that's another way.
The second part was about developing country investment.
Oh, developing country investment. I've never taken money from developing countries. I have no insight and don't care to speculate.
Kind of a two-part question about the emergency room company that you're putting together. How do you see the competitive market for product that's based around AI going, given how easy it is to pick up machine learning tools these days as a software developer? And the second part of it is going into like electronic medical records in a market like the US where there's a huge regulatory component to that, and just commenting on starting a small business heading into that space.
Sure. So first off, can you differentiate yourself based on machine learning and artificial intelligence given the number of frameworks that are out there and how much easier it is to do that these days? Probably not on that alone. And the funny thing is, the more I've learned about the customers, the more I've talked to ER doctors or people in the medical profession, you'll realize that that's the icing on the cake, but mostly they're using day in and day out software that looks like it was made by a bad Windows programmer in 1998. And so actually having good usable software where you can search very easily for patient records, where you could message other nurses and doctors and figure out where they are without using a pager system that then goes to a phone. Basic stuff that you and I would take for granted turns out to be really important. So I think that, no, you can't differentiate on that alone. There are very few companies that can differentiate on technology alone, but you can use that technology to put together a great product experience. And that's something that I think I'm decent at. The regulatory aspect, yeah, I mean, that's a risk factor. It was a risk factor in personal finance as well, dealing with all the bank credentials and finances and security there as well. So yeah, you just have to be careful. Mint's never been hacked that I know of. No, we got a really good security system, or we did when I left.
I will just take 2 more questions. So one here.
I just have a question regarding the finance. So how would you go about evaluating your companies when they're not profitable, and as you said, all the revenue and all that are just rubbish? So.
Oh, I used to have a great slide for this, but it's not in here. That I used to do this when I would speak at Harvard or Stanford MBA schools or Wharton, because the truth of the matter is, you can't, through any sort of rational means, figure out what the valuation will be. The rule of thumb is add $500,000 for every engineer and subtract $250,000 for every business person. So if you've got a startup that's run by sort of 3 MBAs who are like, oh yeah, we'll just outsource the technology to India or Southeast Asia, it's worth negative $750. If you've got 4 or 5, 20-something engineers who are really passionate about it, designers, I think, sort of count positively towards the end product people as well, then it can be worth a couple $1 million. But it's speculative.
There you go, man. I guess one question I do have.
Oh yeah. Hey, Rabbit. What's up?
Yeah. Could you speak to...
I don't know what you're going to ask, but I have a special answer just for you.
I'm not sure. Could you speak to, I guess, New Zealand work ethic in the New Zealand ecosystem in comparison to, I guess, the pace in San Francisco and in the States? Because,
yeah, nobody goes home at 5 or 6 o'clock in startups in San Francisco. So... I mean, in crunch times, I've never asked anybody to work on weekends or anything, but you'll work at least 60 hours a week. And that sounds daunting, but it's like, it's something that you love and that you're passionate about. And I think the best companies are mission-driven companies that like have something to say about the way the world should work. You know, with Mint, it was all about just really understanding your money and growing your money and being really comfortable with money in a way that most people aren't, because it's intimidating. You're always getting dinged with fees, and you can never really maintain a budget because then you're not fun and you're not going out. And how do you balance all of those things? And with the ER software, it's an opportunity to like, holy shit, use software to save lives. Is that possible? Like, I'm never going to be the guy who's, you know, doing the chest compressions and actually, but could I figure out, I mean, we figured out with Mint when I left that we had saved people something like $4 or $5 billion. That's significant. Could you figure out you've statistically saved lives? That's a mission that you can get around and that you can get other people to be excited about, especially when they see how bad software typically is in the medical world, and how people are so scared of regulation and change that everyone's living with this terrible sort of 20-year-old looking software. So when you have a mission, you work harder. So it's like I said, it's better than Europe, but it's also the danger here. This one really gets to me. My dad called me a few weeks ago and he asked me how it was living in a retirement country. This is a man who's living in Florida, which is like the place for retirement in the US. And the reason that it stuck with me is because there's some truth in that. This is a really fun country. Like, there's so much good stuff to do. I went for a surf on Saturday, and you know, there's just so much beauty. You want to take advantage of it, and it can run at odds with, you know, pushing as hard as you need to for a startup. So I don't know. It's a personal question, how you answer that. Oh, but my personal answer to you about the question you didn't ask was, I'm really glad that you've switched to the company that you have, because I was trying to weave in my one last lesson, which is that you can waste years chasing what you think you should do. And in my own personal case, I worked on maglev and self-driving cars and all of this stuff because I kind of thought that you know, my idol when I was growing up was like Thomas Edison. I thought that I should be an inventor. I'm good at technology. I'm a really good programmer. I can do natural language processing, but I'm not the world's best, and I never will be. But I could be one of the best at being a generalist and understanding how product and engineering and business and strategy and market opportunities fit together. And so I'm trying to accept myself for being that. And I feel like you've accepted that you're enthusiastic and everyone likes you, and you should be in sales and marketing and build a cult of personality around, you know, your new company. And you should never have done happily remote sensing on drones with computer vision. You're just not a computer vision guy. And so that's an important lesson for all of us. It's sort of, I don't mean to put you on the spot or make light of it, but it's hard to know yourself and accept who you are and really utilize your strengths, your own strengths. I'm trying, and I think I'll be the better for it.
Just touching on that, then, what was your realization point? Both of you, actually, would be good. What was the point where you kind of realized that and stopped chasing and then accepted? Or at least realized that maybe you weren't and trying to accept it?
Well, this new business came about not because I was looking for and searching for and trying to force another company, which I've certainly done in the past, you know, almost to the point of actively chronicling all the problems in my life, because problems are where you start things. But it almost happened without trying. It's like the problem found me in some sense. And then you learn about it and you grow more passionate about it, and you just have this burning desire to solve it rather than looking for that thing to start. And I just realized that I'd been doing it a different way at some points in the past, and I was at risk of doing that again here in New Zealand because I had time on my hands, which is both an incredibly fortunate position that I'm in, not sort of having to work for a living, but dangerous in a different way.
And yours?
I think it was the realization that we were about to waste 2 years of R&D on something that the technical risk was extremely high, and it just so happened that we had also built something for fun on the side that was something we're super passionate about and people were interested in. So why the fuck wouldn't we?
Yeah. That's a good quote. I hope someone tweeted that. We'll take one more question.
I've got, I suppose, 2 questions, but I'll try and make them quick. The first one is, as someone who's just had their first failure, seeing your graph made me feel better, thank you. Do you have any words of wisdom sort of around that? And the second part is on managing the highs and lows, because I'm trying to escape a corporate. And I suppose when you're busting your ass on a startup that you're absolutely obsessed with, and then it stops, how do you manage that?
Oh, this is such a good question. I'm glad you asked. Remember at the very beginning of the talk, I said that you tend to put entrepreneurs, and particularly successful ones, on a pedestal and not necessarily realize that they're normal human beings. Startups are particularly challenging. They're completely outside of the normal career path and structure that people go through. I remember quitting my job to do Mint and watching my life savings sort of drain away to pay for things and to pay for employees, while sort of your friends are getting promotions and raises, and you wonder if you've made the right choice. So being an entrepreneur it's an emotional roller coaster, and it's okay to feel sad. It's okay to say, what the hell am I doing? If this was a good idea, somebody else would have done it already. And all of the sort of things that you can tell yourself, and then the next day be totally excited that you're going to dominate the world with your startup, and then sort of fall back into, this will never work, this sucks, I suck. And I didn't know, you think maybe that's like a personality defect, or maybe it's just you. Everyone seems like they're just so in it. And then I talked to, because we have just great networks in Silicon Valley, I talked to Jeremy Stoppelman, who's the founder of Yelp. Now it's a public company and worth a couple $2 billion, hugely popular, although not used as much in New Zealand. And he told me that exact same thing. And for the first time I realized that I wasn't the weirdo, the one who's abnormal, the one who just I don't know, you think, oh, I'm just not strong enough to do this, or if I'm having doubts, isn't that a problem? No, it's just normal. It's just normal. So it's okay. You're just fine. It's okay to fail. It'll take you a while to get over it. Try not to force it, to find the next one. One day it'll find you, or a friend will bring you a problem that you get really excited about.
I feel like that's the perfect point to put it in there. Cool. Oh, how'd you go for the microphone?
Cool. All right, that was awesome. Thanks, guys, for getting so involved in the questions. There's some really awesome ones come through. We've got the room for another sort of 30 to 40 minutes, so please do stick around. And Aaron, I think you're going to hang around for that time. So form an orderly queue. Awesome. So one last big round of applause to thank Aaron for coming in.
Thank you for moderating.
Just a quick word to thank our sponsors for making this all possible.
Yeah, so thanks to 90 Seconds for doing the filming, Simpson Gruson and Container Door for sponsoring Garage Project for Biz. and Grid, obviously, for hosting us, and Eva did an awesome job as well, so I think she deserves a round of applause for that.